Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a moment in our distant past, maybe 5,000 to 7,000 years ago.
Right, the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age period.
Exactly. And something happens where the male lineage across the globe faces, well, near
The
annihilation.
numbers are pretty stark.
Yeah, staggering. It seems like only 1 in 17 men survived. 1 in 17.
It's hard to even get your head around that kind of ratio.
What on earth could have caused something like that? Targeting men specifically, leaving women largely unaffected. And there's no obvious archaeological smoking gun.
No massive asteroid impact layer right then. No clear global plague targeting only men.
It's a huge mystery, and today on the deep dive, we're going to wrestle with it.
And it starts with the genetics, doesn't it? That 2015 genome research study really blew the lid off this.
It did. It showed this near global collapse in Y-chromosome diversity.
Right, the Y chromosome passed father to son, so it tracks the purely male line.
And that diversity just plummeted almost everywhere.
And this is key,
Yeah.
the mitochondrial DNA, which you get from your mother.
So the female lineage.
That stayed relatively stable, which points, as you said, to some kind of intense pressure almost exclusively on males.
Okay, so that's the genetic puzzle. Now, the source material our listener sent in, this YouTube transcript, it throws a really interesting idea into the mix.
Which is,
Could this massive genetic die-off be linked to an ancient colossal war, specifically the one detailed in the Indian epic, the Mahabharata?
okay, connecting the genes to the legends.
Yeah. So our mission today is to see if these threads, the DNA, these ancient texts, and some frankly weird archaeological finds might actually line up.
A deep dive to connect the dots, basically.
Think of it as your shortcut to getting a handle on this really pivotal but kind of forgotten time. We'll hit those 3 areas: genetics, texts, archaeology.
Sounds good. So digging back into that genetic bottleneck first.
Yeah, tell us more about that study.
Well, the genome research paper showed this wasn't just a dip, it was a crash in male effective population size within a pretty short window, geologically speaking.
You mentioned 1 in 17 surviving. How does that compare to, say, known historical events?
Okay, think about World War I, World War II. Horrific losses, right?
Mm.
Some countries lost, 10, maybe 15% of their young men. Terrible.
Devastating.
But this ancient event, we're talking potentially over 90% of male lineages disappearing. It's a completely different order of magnitude.
Wow.
And as the listener's source highlights, the big problem is, unlike WWI or WWII, we don't have clear, widespread historical records of conflicts big enough to do that back then.
It's like this giant genetic scar tissue, but we can't find the original wound in the history books.
Precisely, which makes you look elsewhere.
Exactly. And that leads us straight to the stories, specifically the Mahabharata.
Which is, well, it's immense.
Oh, it's huge. For anyone who hasn't encountered it, it's the longest epic poem known. We're
Right.
talking hundreds of thousands of verses.
Way longer than, say, the Iliad and Odyssey combined, many times over.
Right. And a massive part of it, tens of thousands of verses, is dedicated to just one thing, the Kurukshetra War.
And the detail in that account is what's really striking, isn't it?
It is. The transcript mentions the sheer numbers involved derived from the text itself, tallying up the armies.
Something like 3.94 million combatants mentioned. It's an almost unbelievable number for that period.
It really is. And it describes daily battles, troop formations, strategies, casualties, even like the psychological breakdowns of the warriors.
It reads less like a simple myth and more like, well, the transcript calls it military documentation in poetic form.
Or a logbook of societal collapse. It's got that kind of detailed, almost forensic feel in places.
Mhm.
And then, this is where it gets really wild, the weaponry.
Ah, yes. Not just swords and arrows.
Not at all. The Mahabharata describes things like the Brahmastra. The text says it created unbearable heat, blinding light.
And cause long-term effects, right? Like making the land barren, causing miscarriages or stillbirths years later.
Exactly. Descriptions that sound disturbingly like, well, like radiation fallout. It's hard not to make that connection when you read it.
And there were others.
Yeah, the Narayanastra supposedly able to target specific people or groups. And pushpastras that could attack using like the elements themselves, fire, wind, water.
Right. This is definitely beyond conventional ancient warfare as we picture it.
Way beyond. The listener's source mentions specific effects described in the text. The sky burning, hair, and nails falling out.
Again, things that resonate uncomfortably with descriptions of radiation sickness or exposure to extreme energy.
And the outcome of this war in the epic. Total devastation.
Near total erasure of dynasties, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Almost all the royal lines wiped out.
Almost all. Only one single heir supposedly survived, and that was after an attack targeted him while he was still in his mother's womb.
It paints a picture of a war that didn't just defeat enemies, it aimed to annihilate lineages, an ending point for an entire age.
Okay, so if a war like that, with weapons like that, actually happened, you'd think there'd be some physical evidence left behind, wouldn't you?
You would expect something, yes. Some scar on the landscape, perhaps.
Which brings us to the archaeology. The transcript points to Mohenjo-Daro, famous site, Indus Valley civilization, modern Pakistan.
Right, one of the world's earliest major urban settlements.
But it was abandoned, and the way it ended is weird. No clear signs of a big invasion, no flood layers, no mass graves from disease. It just seems to stop suddenly.
And there were bodies found, weren't there? Not in graves.
Yeah, that's the unsettling part. 33 skeletons, I think, found just scattered in the streets. Some looked like they were just going about their day, even found holding hands.
It's just something sudden, overwhelming, not a slow decline.
Exactly. But then there's the really controversial bit the transcript mentions, vitrification.
Ah, the melted stones. This is where things get really debated.
Explain that. Vitrification is.
It's when materials like stone or clay are heated so intensely, so quickly, that they melt and fuse together into a glassy substance.
And that takes extreme heat.
Extreme heat, far hotter than a normal house fire or even ancient metalworking forges could typically produce. We're talking thousands of degrees Celsius, potentially.
And researchers Davenport and Vincenti are mentioned in the source. They claim to find this at Mohenjo-Daro.
They did. They documented areas, particularly one spot they called a focal blast zone, with fused clay pottery shards and this greenish, glassy material.
But it's controversial.
Highly controversial. Others argue it could be from intense pottery kiln accidents or natural deposits.
Yeah.
But the sheer extent and the nature of the reported vitrification, it keeps the question alive.
And Mohenjo-Daro isn't alone, right? The transcript lists other places.
Correct. That's another intriguing layer. Similar finds of vitrified forts or structures, dating roughly to that same broad time frame, 5000 to 3000 BCE, have been reported globally.
Where else?
Ancient forts in Scotland are famous for it. Silistani in Peru has these strange melted sections on its stone towers. Sites in British Columbia, Canada. Even Alba Longa, an ancient city near Rome in Italy.
So, scattered across the world, you have these sites with possible evidence of extreme, unexplained heat events roughly aligning with the genetic bottleneck period.
It's a pattern that's hard to explain easily with conventional models of ancient history or natural phenomena. Could they be the scars of whatever the Mahabharata describes? It's a possibility.
But as you said, the Mahabharata isn't the only ancient text talking about godlike beings and devastating wars.
That's right. We need to look at Sumer as well.
Ancient Sumer, Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, one of the cradles of civilization.
And they left us thousands of cuneiform tablets, a huge library of their history, myths, and records.
And according to the listener's source, their stories contain some really uncanny parallels to the Mahabharata accounts.
They do. The Sumerian texts talk extensively about the Anunnaki.
Often translated as those who from heaven came, depicted as powerful beings, gods, rulers.
And crucially, the texts describe major conflicts, not just between human kings, but often between factions of these Anunnaki themselves, like the famous rivalry between the brothers Enlil and Enki.
And these wars of the gods had earthly consequences.
Big time. The tablets describe cities being literally scorched by fire raining from the skies. There are mentions of a poison wind that kills people and animals, desolates the land. Even hints of genetic manipulation of early humans.
Wow. The transcript mentions the lament for What's that?
It's a powerful Sumerian poem mourning the utter destruction of the great city of It's incredibly evocative.
Well, can you share a bit?
It talks about houses being flattened into mounds, wells filling with blood or corpses, people vanishing like smoke. It's a picture of total annihilation from some overwhelming force.
Chilling.
And like the Mahabharata, the Sumerian tablets also mention things that sound like advanced technology.
Yep.
Flying boats or chariots in the sky, weapons that can turn cities to ash.
And the effects described.
Again, very similar to the Mahabharata. Descriptions consistent with intense heat or radiation causing blindness, sickness, skin peeling, or burns.
So the listener's source is really highlighting these parallels.
Exactly. Blinding light, poisoned air, burnt earth, fertility problems like stillborn children. These specific, unusual details appearing in texts from ancient India and ancient Sumer thousands of miles apart, different languages, different cultures.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could they be describing the same global level event from their own cultural perspectives?
It's a tantalizing possibility. The similarities are quite specific.
Okay, so we've got the genetic bottleneck, these strange archaeological sites, and now textual echoes from both India and Sumer, all pointing to something catastrophic around, say, 5,000, 3,000 BCE. Can we narrow down that timing?
This is where it gets really interesting using astronomy.
Right, the transcript brought up the work of Nilesh.
Yes, an Indian researcher who took a novel approach to dating the Mahabharata War.
How did he do it?
Instead of relying solely on genealogies or traditional chronologies, he treated the hundreds of astronomical descriptions within the Mahabharata text itself as data points.
So mentions of eclipses, planets, stars.
Exactly. Things like, Saturn was near this star, or Mars did this peculiar movement, or there were two eclipses close together. He cataloged over 200 of these specific sky observations.
And then what? Plug them into a computer.
Essentially, yes. He used modern astronomical software, the kind that can accurately simulate the positions of stars and planets thousands of years ago, to see if there was any point in time when all those described celestial events actually happened simultaneously, as seen from the location of the Kurukshetra battlefield.
Okay. And did he find such a time?
Remarkably, yes, according to his analysis presented in the source material, there's only one date in the last, say, 10,000 years or more, where all those specific, often quite unusual astronomical configurations align perfectly.
And that date is?
October 16th, 5561 BCE. He proposes that as the potential starting date of the 18-day Kurukshetra War described in the epic.
5561 BCE. That is incredibly specific, and it falls right within that broader time frame of the genetic bottleneck?
It does. It puts a potential timestamp right in the middle of that period.
Can you give some examples of those alignments he used?
Sure. The transcript mentions a few key ones. Saturn being near the bright star Aldebaran, Mars performing a retrograde loop near the star Antares in the constellation Jista, Jupiter having a conjunction with the moon in the Revati Nakshatra.
Okay.
Also, a very specific sequence of two eclipses, a solar and a lunar one happening within just 13 days of each other, which is astronomically rare but described in the text. And Venus being prominent in a particular sector of the sky, Purva Bhadrapada.
These aren't just vague, poetic lines, then.
He argues they're not. They function like precise sky coordinates, and the fact that sophisticated software confirms these multiple independent coordinates all converge on that single date. Well, it makes a compelling case for a potential historical anchor for the epic's core event.
Okay, let's try and pull these threads together now.
Right, the big picture.
The transcript reminds us, global population back then, maybe around 10 million total-ish.
Roughly, yes. Very sparse compared to today.
The Mahabharata talks about, what, nearly 4 million soldiers in this one war?
According to the tallies derived from the text, yes. Almost 4 million.
And these would have been overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, men.
Correct. Armies were male.
So 4 million men potentially killed or removed from the breeding pool out of a global population where the total number of men might have only been, what, 5 million? Maybe a bit more.
You see the implication. That single conflict, if those numbers are even remotely accurate, could account for a massive chunk of the world's male population at the time.
It suddenly makes that 1 in 17 survival rate from the genetic bottleneck seem, well, statistically much more plausible, doesn't it?
It does provide a potential mechanism, especially if, as the epic suggests, the war involved wiping out entire clans or lineages, not just soldiers on the field. That would drastically prune the Y-chromosome tree.
And the Mahabharata itself, it mentions participants from all over, right? Not just local Indian kingdoms.
Yes, the text names groups like the Yavanas, often linked to Greeks or Ionians, Kambojas, Central Asia, China's Shakas, Scythians, regions far beyond the Indian subcontinent.
Now, scholars often argue those are later additions or just directional names.
That's the standard interpretation, yes. But if you're considering a potential link to a global genetic event,
then having the text itself hint at a geographically widespread conflict becomes more intriguing, doesn't it?
it aligns, at least thematically.
And then the transcript threw in that really speculative idea about warriors from Patala.
Ah, yes, the underworld or Antipodes reference. Some interpretations link Patala to Mesoamerica, literally the other side of the world from India.
It's a huge leap, obviously.
Very speculative. But if you're trying to explain a truly global male bottleneck, the idea of a conflict that somehow spanned or had participants from such vast distances, it fits the scale of the genetic finding, even if the mechanism is unclear.
Okay, but that brings up a huge question. How? How could people back then, thousands of years before widespread writing, remember all this? The huge numbers, the battle details, those incredibly precise star positions.
That's a critical point, and the transcript touches on collective memory.
The idea that societies encode trauma and important knowledge.
Exactly. Not just in writing, but through stories, through epics, through poems recited over and over, through rituals, symbols, maybe even landscape features tied to the stories. Oral tradition can be incredibly robust, especially for events that shape a culture's identity.
So the suggestion is that the Mahabharata, maybe the Sumerian laments too, aren't just stories, they're like trauma maps.
That's one way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Ways to process, remember, and transmit the memory of events so profound, so devastating, that they couldn't be forgotten. The specific details, the numbers, the stars might have been encoded deliberately as mnemonic aids, ensuring the core story survived.
It's a powerful thought that these epics might be a form of like cultural DNA, carrying information from a very deep past.
Perhaps a kind of encrypted history waiting to be deciphered.
So to recap then, we've got this potential war pinpointed maybe to 5561 BCE by astronomical data within the Mahabharata itself.
Check.
We have a massive, almost global male extinction event shown in our DNA happening roughly in that same period.
Check. Supported by genetic science.
And we have these scattered, puzzling archaeological sites around the world with evidence of unexplained intense heat, again, broadly fitting the timeline.
Vitrified ruins, yeah.
Yeah.
The physical scars, perhaps. Check.
It really feels like these separate lines of evidence, genetic, textual, archaeological, might actually be pointing towards the same huge, forgotten global event.
The pieces seem to align in a way that's certainly thought-provoking. It suggests a narrative far bigger and maybe stranger than the one we usually tell about our ancient past.
So this leaves you, the listener, with something to mull over, doesn't it?
Hmm.
If these ancient civilizations were capable of encoding their deepest experiences, their greatest traumas, not just in stone, but in story and memory,
Transmitted across millennia.
then maybe our job isn't just to dig in the dirt, but also to, really listen to these ancient voices, to treat these epics not just as quaint myths, but as potential carriers of real history.
Absolutely. Perhaps the most profound